I hope you're well.
By the grace of God, God has done his part. It's Akufo-Addo'S own we are waiting for now.
Yesterday, you had calls to organize a press conference. What is the concern that led you to share your views or concerns on the matter of NIB ADB measure?
Okay. So you'll recall that about 2 weeks ago, you called me on your platform and I gave some preliminary insight into some of the concerns that we had with the banking sector and had indicated that I was planning to come on a much more fuller conversation on those matters, if you recall. So yesterday was the culmination of the preparatory work that we had been doing in order to establish a case to enable us proper some solutions and some suggestions to the government. We all know that in our country, jobs are very difficult to come by. We actually struggle to create some sort of job we call the NAPCO, which could even pay stipends that would take people to work and back. But even then, we failed. So job creation has been a very difficult matter. And youth unemployment is threatening to become a national security threat. And we need to make sure that we provide opportunities for our people to be gainfully employed so they can take care of themselves and their dependents and improve livelihood. And we know that when all of us were in school, one of the sectors that many people wished they would work when they leave school was the banking sector. Today, banking sector jobs are becoming perilous. And so when we got hints that the government of Ghana, which owns the National Investment Bank, and the government of Ghana, which together with the Bank of Ghana and the Ghana Amalgamated Trust, which hold about 96% in ADB, were contemplating something funny to do with NIB and to do with ADB. We thought that it was important that we assisted them to find a solution that will be a win-win for all of us. So yesterday's conversation was just to throw light on the challenges that we think we are facing and to proffer some solutions for consideration of government. And that is exactly what we did yesterday. Senator, I'm very, very worried about the way government is handling the NIB to the extent that for one whole year, the managing director was Zoom managing NIB from Canada. One whole year. I mean, a patient, you are taking care of a patient, basically, and you can abandon the patient and go and stay in Canada and be Zooming to manage that patient. If this was your personal property, is that the way you would treat it? And we pay taxpayers' money. And government was quiet. Who gave him that permission to be away for 1 year and to be Zoom managing such an important institution? I felt very worried that we are paying lip service to the NIB. And that is what we attempted to put forward, that government should give more attention. Government should be more committed to helping NIB. And it is important to tell the people of Ghana that for all these 6-7 years, the Bank of Ghana has never given one kobo to NIB as liquidity support. So for this bank to be able to do its own work, to be able to survive all this turmoil without a center of even a kobo from the Bank of Ghana for liquidity support, tells you that they have been able to manage the bank without going to the Bank of Ghana to ask for support. And all they need is what every bank deserves: fully capitalized bank that will be liquid, will be strong, and will continue to perform the role that it was assigned by the Parliament of Ghana when it was established by an Act of Parliament in 1963. That act clearly defines that this bank was given the mandate to scale up investment in the various sectors of the economy and to contribute to economic development. It has done so successfully. Today, some of the roads and government infrastructure have been done purely on account of pre-finance from facilities that contractors take from the National Investment Bank. The Agriculture Development Bank was the dream of the NIB to scale up investment in agriculture finance, and that was why a department within the NIB was halved off to form the Agriculture Development Bank. So Agric can have a better focus and be able to deliver to the mandate that it has set up. Again, it is a pioneer in the establishment of Nestle Ghana, and today it still holds about 24% stake in Nestle Ghana. So the contribution of National Investment Bank over the years has been very remarkable, and it is not only an economic pillar, but it is our pride, and we must do everything to let it survive.
Is it still a viable bank?
Extremely viable. In fact, NIB is the most resilient bank today. Not many banks will survive what has been thrown at NIB for the past 7 years. Not many banks will survive it. But the NIB has survived it, and like I said, that they have not even gone to Bank of Ghana to ask for liquidity support. They have been able to do this all on their own, but they need to be given the level of financial support that the Bank of Ghana, in its wisdom, announced that all shareholders must provide to their bank. Recapitalization of the bank. It is not only NIB, all other banks were requested to do so. Why NIB was not recapitalized still beats my imagination. And we think that government doesn't even need to bring in a lot of money to recapitalize NIB. Government already has a lot of money sitting with NIB, which are seen as obligatory for the bank to return them. All that government needs to do is to change the obligations on those balance sheets and say that, yes, I gave you 1.3 billion as a loan. I intend that you pay back, but please give me shares and use it to finance the bank. And the bank will immediately get 1.3 billion Ghana cedis as capital that will help to strengthen the bank. But of course, immediately government decides that the NIB should issue shares to it and convert those monies to shares. Those monies will begin to sit on the balance sheet of NIB as investment. And as NIB can go on the market, sell those bonds that the government issued for it, the 1.3 billion, and raise 1.3 billion cash. So straight away, NIB will be one of the most liquid banks in Ghana. Of course, NIB's investment in NIB, which is about 24%, was valued somewhere in 2018 for about $500 million. 500 million Ghana cedis. NIB bought those shares for 50 million. So if NIB were to sell those shares, the government were to give it the approval to sell those shares, what it simply means is that NIB will get, in addition to the 1.3 billion bonds that will be sold, an additional 500 million to increase its cash position to 1.8 billion. Now, if it sells the 500 million, because it bought it for 50 million, you will see that there's a profit of 450 million. We'll call that the capital gains or capital surplus. That will contribute to the capital of NIB. So immediately it will move from 1.3 billion to 1.75 billion in capital. This is not difficult. This is just sitting on the balance sheet of NIB. Apart from that, the NIB has given loans to businessmen and contractors who executed government jobs to the tune of over 1 billion Ghana cedis. Those monies, government has not paid the contractors, and because government has not paid the contractors, the International Financial Reporting Standard 9 requires that those loans become they become almost uncertain that you recover them. And when those things are outstanding for more than 90 days, you are obliged to impair them. So NIB has written off close to 1 billion Ghana cedis of loans that it has given to contractors who have done the work for government. Certificates have been issued for government to pay. Government has refused to pay those money, and as a result, NIB has suffered a deficit of 1 billion Ghana cedis. Government should just pay those contractors, and NIB will get 1 billion back. Because that 1 billion has been written up against capital, it will go back to increase the capital by 1 billion. And we already have our 1.75. So that will increase NIB's capital base to 2.75 billion. Of course, NIB has a deficit of 2.4 billion. So if you take it out, NIB will have 350 million. You only need 50 million to meet the minimum capital requirement of 400 million. So clearly, there's everything in the balance sheet of NIB that if it is properly restructured, NIB automatically should be back and running. And I can say that that 1 billion impairment of contractors, if it is paid, immediately NIB will get another cash of 1 billion to add to the 1.8 billion. That will be 2.8 billion Ghana cedis of cash to NIB. No bank, check the balance sheet, no bank in Ghana has cash and cash equivalents of 2.8 billion. How can a bank that potentially would be the best bank, potentially would be the most capitalized, potentially would be the most liquid bank, be treated in the manner that it is being treated? Except there may be some ulterior motive that we do not know.
Well, you clearly believe, and from everything you've just said, you have a roadmap as to how to fix this problem. Is that why you suggest that you are neither for collapsing it or merging it with the Agricultural Development Bank?
So let's ask this question. If ADB goes to acquire NIB, ADB itself, if you do the analysis of the capital adequacy of ADB, which requires you to adjust the risk on the balance sheet of ADB per what we call the Basel II and 3 standards, it will be clear that ADB doesn't have up to 13% capital adequacy required by the minimum threshold. So ADB itself is sick, okay, and needs treatment. And I say that ADB sickness is akin to asthma. Our NIB, we know the situation, and it is clearly that NIB has something like diabetes. You want to tell me that in common wisdom, if you add asthma to diabetes, you will create a healthy child? Clearly no. I mean, who does that? So you treat them for their individual ailments. And treating them for the individual ailments is to improve the capital adequacy of ADB, is to improve the recapitalization of NIB. And I've shown you how that can easily be done with NIB. For ADB, since Bank of Ghana is 64% shareholder through the Financial Investment Trust, they are setting up a fund that they call the Financial Stability Fund of 15 billion. I hope you have heard that. So if you have 15 billion and your bank is in trouble, you simply give the money to the Financial Investment Trust that you own 100% to come and provide additional funding to ADB, and ADB will be fine. If we think that the 50 million deficit that we will finally get at NIB, government cannot provide it, we issue shares to the Financial Investment Trust, renounceable to the government of Ghana. And Financial Investment Trust will take part of the 15 billion to come and give the 50 million to NIB. I mean, this is not difficult. Why some people try to introduce complexities in very obvious, simple, common sense finance decisions beat my imagination. I don't know what they teach in Yale and Harvard that these people went and sat there. They probably just went and passed there and came back. Otherwise, this is not a complex discussion. We should not even be discussing NIB by now. NIB should have been up and running, very liquid, very well capitalized, and sustain the job. Let me tell you, when you want to merge ADB to NIB, do you know that when you merge, ADB doesn't exist, NIB doesn't exist, you create a new entity. And that new entity, you issue shares from the new entity per the shareholding of the two entities that have come. You issue shares to the owners. In this case, it's still the same government. And then you can put the two of them together in one balance sheet in a new company. So obviously, you are going to collapse NIB. And the law that sets up NIB at 612 is quite clear. Under Section 22, which provides the liquidation procedures, says that NIB cannot be liquidated in any form, or anything cannot be done to NIB that has the ultimate effect of liquidating that bank unless you come back to Parliament, for Parliament to pass a law pursuant to that objective and give directions as to how that should be done. So clearly, you can't merge. If you merge, it means you are effectively collapsing NIB. It's not possible. If you go to acquire, it's the same effect, because you see, when you acquire, ADB goes to acquire NIB. NIB has a universal banking license. ADB has a universal banking license. Are we going to operate two universal banking licenses? Oh, no, it doesn't make sense. Okay? If you merge the two, ADB has a managing director. The NIB has a managing director. Are you going to operate two managing directors? Both banks have financial controllers. Are you going to operate two financial controllers? Are you going to compete against yourself on the same street? So, in your street where Radio Gold is, if there's NIB and there's ADB, the two of them are going to operate along each side, this one NIB and this one ADB, and they compete against themselves? Obviously, no. They will move one of them to go and join the other and collapse the other. So when they collapse the other one, where are the workers? The workers will go. Okay? The people that they supported, their families are going to suffer. Livelihoods are going to suffer. So clearly, and it is obvious that ADB is a landlord. If ADB acquires NIB, NIB is a tenant. If one of them must go, is it the tenant that will go or the landlord? Senna? Senna?
Okay.
If you go to rent in somebody's house and they say that we must leave, is it the tenant that will leave or the landlord? So clearly NIB will leave. You will kill NIB. Look, when they consolidated those 7 banks, you see the consolidated banks. The 7 banks gave them 190 branches. They came out to brag that Consolidated Bank was then the second largest bank by branch network after GCB. And I say we are not serious. The next day, up to date, there are only 114 branches that are operating in CBG. What has happened to the 76 branches? What has happened to the workers who used to work in those 76 branches? What has happened to the families that depended on those workers and the community that got livelihood from those workers? So clearly that is what will happen. And we cannot, in a country such as ours, where people struggle to get credit, where agriculture is given a focus, investment and government projects are being financed by NIB. You want to collapse one of them when you can have the two. And we all know that it simply doesn't make sense in a country where we are struggling to create jobs to be collapsing some jobs. That cannot be a solution.
Aside the argument of jobs, you said the NIB was set up in 1963 with a clear mandate. Has it been delivering at that mandate, at least within recent times?
It is the reason I have explained to you that most of our roads have been built with loans from NIB to contractors. Otherwise, government normally doesn't have the road money at the time they give the contract. They go to NIB to take the money and they construct the roads. And government gets the money later, they issue certificates and government pay. So that is a tremendous contribution to our infrastructure. Businessmen are taking money from NIB to engage in all kinds of investments that are creating jobs and creating livelihoods and paying people and contributing to taxes. That is the mandate of NIB. I have told you a significant contribution of NIB in the establishment of Nestle Ghana. I have told you a significant contribution in the pioneering and the establishment of Agriculture Development Bank. And we all know that Agriculture Development Bank has been the backbone of our agriculture sector, all because of the vision of NIB. And NIB realizing that in order not to be distracted from its mandate, let's create a special purpose vehicle called Agriculture Development Bank and give it a mandate to focus on agriculture finance. What else do we need more than this? What else? And you want to kill this? And what is even worse is that you are asking ADB, which is a child of NIB. I have just told you how NIB gave birth to ADB. Senna, can you say that you are so rich and grown that you can go and marry your mother? Huh? You are so grown and now rich that you can go and marry your mother. How do you want ADB to go and marry his own mother? I mean, it's just ridiculous. Look, ADB is owned 63.4% by the Financial Investment Trust, which is 100% owned by the Bank of Ghana. ADB is owned 21% by the government of Ghana. And the same government of Ghana, through Ghana Amalgamated Trust, which is a subsidiary of the National Trust Holding Company, through a nominal shareholding, owns 11%. So in total, the state owns 96% of ADB. So if you decide that you are going to get ADB to buy, and I've told ADB doesn't have money, it is already struggling. It means you must bring money to give to ADB to go and acquire NIB. So the government will go and raise its own money. The government that says it doesn't have money to save ADB or NIB will go and raise money and give it to ADB, its own bank. Then ADB will come and acquire NIB, government's own bank. Then ADB will pay the money to government, its own money. And then the next day, the government will wake up and say, oh, we no longer owe ADB, NIB, we have sold NIB to ADB. Whose money was used? Your money. Whose bank was used to buy NIB? Your bank. Whose bank is NIB? Your bank. Who did they pay the money to? You. Bro, I mean, that doesn't make sense. So, then you build a house. You go and put your family in that house. One day you arrive and tell your family that, look, you went and took a loan, came and bought your own house, deposited the money in the bank. The next day you woke up and pretended that you don't own a house because you have sold the house. You come and tell your family, let's go and rent a place because I've sold the house. And they ask you, you sold it to who? Yourself. Who collected the money? Yourself. Where did they get the money? You got to the bank, your own money. Where is the money? You put it in your bank account. I mean, what type of logic is this? Where did they learn this one? Sana? Where did they learn this one? Which school teaches this one? Meanwhile, you say that the bank that you have sold to somebody, they say just bring small money. From the analysis I've done, you just need 1 billion to pay for the contractors and get some 50 million to come and add, restructure the balance sheet, and ADB has 2.8 billion cash sitting there. NIB has 2.8 billion cash sitting there. Okay, NIB has cleared the 2.4 billion and has a minimum capital of 400 million, very compliant with your own Bank of Ghana directive. You say no, you go and give the money to somebody, and the money you are going to give to somebody is more than what you need to save NIB. Chana, I'm telling you that this tells you that there's something there. There's something in there. You know, these people, when they are creating complexities, be very careful. Complexities are just meant to confuse you and I so that they can loot in the process. Otherwise, this is very basic. This is obvious. This is common sense finance decision. Why all these complexities? Clearly, it is to achieve an objective. Let me ask you. As we speak, you remember Ajapa royalties there? You remember Ajapa?
Vividly.
Ajapa, they valued 15 years cash flow,
Yes.
From royalties for 15 years. Is that not what they did?
Yes.
And they said that it was all worth in present value terms 1 billion. So that 1 billion, they were going to sell 50% of it and get 500 million. And for the rest of our lives, we would have lost those royalties of 50%. Is that not it? Now, we already had a vehicle that is managing the royalties called the Mineral Income Investment Fund, a fund that was established by an act of Parliament. That Mineral Income Investment Fund is the one managing the royalties that we refuse to give to Japan. Mineral Income Investment Fund has just published a report saying that by January, its total assets under management, in other words, its total value will be $1 billion. $1 billion, not 15 years old, just January. And that January would have meant from the time we stopped this nonsense, it would have meant 18 months. They have raised the 1 billion present value that we're selling for 15 years cash flow. They've raised it in 18 months. They've gotten that money in 18 months. In other words, the 50% of 500 million Ken was looking for was realized in 9 months, less than 1 year. So what would have happened to the rest of the year? These are thieves. These are thieves. Creating complexities just to dupe and to loot. Do you get it? And we told them, how did you value that? In valuation, there are various methods, but the closest you can get is to go on the stock exchange market across the group and get similar sovereign wealth funds. And there were several examples from Canada and US. You can discount them because they are on the market and they have been de-risked. You can discount them, but you use a discounting of their price-earning ratio to multiply by the present value of your cash flows. And when we did that, Japan would have been worth over 8 billion in 15 years cash flow, present value. But this would give us 1 billion. So 7 billion was going to be their money. So they would have bought a 500 million instead of 3.5 to 4 billion. The next day they go on the market will reprice it to reflect the 4 billion. They will just sell it off, take 4 billion, pay off the 500 million they brought, and they are richer by 3.5 billion. This is what they were doing to us. This is exactly what they were doing. I don't know whether they think that they were only people who were, I don't know why they believe in criminality. Why they believe in fraud. Is it a crime that we've given you the country to manage for us? Is it a crime? So all these complexities around NIB, look, I can tell you it is a ploy. You remember I kept telling you that they have a target to take NIB and ADB home. They have a target to buy those two banks. Remember I told you. Why didn't they choose DCB or any other bank, but they chose ADB? Because ADB is listed on a stock exchange. 64% of it is held by the regulator. So when they put together, they will now go and tell the regulator, but you are the regulator. How can you be a regulator and a player at the same time? It doesn't make sense. It makes you conflicted in your activities, and you cannot have a clear view, because when it comes to ADB and NIB, you are a bit conflicted, so you are likely not to crack the ship. So please, divert your interest from the industry and focus on regulation. Then they will come with a strategic investor. That strategic investor is coming from their house.
So that's what you suspect the ultimate objective is?
What I suspect they want to do. Then before you realize ADB and NIB, they say, there's a strategic investor from Morocco. No, they themselves went to Morocco and brought their money here. That's what they want to do.
That's a theory that you cannot prove.
Huh?
It's a theory that you cannot prove, can you?
Well, you want to prove everything with these people until time you can never prove. Were you able to convince anybody and prove that Ejapa royalties was a scam? Within 18 months, haven't you found the truth? 18 months, haven't you found the truth? At the time, could I have proven it to you? When I said it, that Ejapa was worth over 8 billion, did you believe me? Now it is clear that in just 18 months, Ejapa is worth 1 billion. So give them time, and you will see what they will do. It is better, and when these people are testing the waters, don't take them for a joke. Beyond all of this, before you realize, we have seen data bank doing transaction advisory for government and for Ministry of Finance. They will try to do these combinations, and then they will recruit themselves as transaction advisors, and before you realize, 50 million, 100 million for transaction advisory fee. That is what they are looking at. It's not the interest of ADB or NIB. That's what they are looking at.
Would Parliament have a role in this decision, or government can just wake up in the morning?
I've just explained to you that NIB, an establishment by an act of Parliament, and that act of Parliament under Section 22 under liquidation procedures states clearly what should happen. So Parliament reserved the right, and Parliament knew that there may be circumstances that will require that we terminate the life of NIB, and wanted to be fully involved in taking that decision and the burial of their own child. And so Parliament say, come and tell us our child is sick. Let us find a way to cure and to heal. If we fail and the best option is to kill it, you will give it a dignified death and a dignified burial. Nobody can take our child from us and kill and bury our child for us. No. So they will have to come back to us. If we so believe that that's the only option left, we will give it a dignified death and a dignified burial.
All right, well, thank you very much for speaking to us.
It's my pleasure. Thank you very much.
That's a clear position from the minority. The way he concluded is to tell you that as far as they are concerned, if they bring that to Parliament, which they need to do because of the act that established the NIB,